All right, hi everyone. This is Francesca at the Physicians Committee. Thanks for joining us. So today is our follow-up webinar to our Process Meet webinar, and we're very excited that you're able to join us. My name is Francesca Valente, and I'm the Nutrition Program Specialist at the Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine. And as you know from last time, the Physicians Committee is a national nonprofit that works to promote good nutrition for disease prevention and survival. We also offer free educational resources for schools and resources for healthcare professionals and lay people. We're so happy to have you with us. So we'd really like today to be able to answer questions that have come up since that last webinar that we did. And so you have a couple of places to do that. You can answer our question there, what questions about Process Meet have come up in your school since the last webinar. If you have a question, some other question you'd like to place, you can do in the Q&A box at the bottom. And then at the top, we have a couple of files that you could download. The first one is the Coalition for Healthy School Foods recipe booklet. And then we have the USDA foods list here because we got a couple of questions about that before we started. So we have those there, and I would just love to first introduce our speakers, and then we can get going. And feel free at any time to type us a question. So we'll hear today from the Physicians Committee's Senior Dietitian, Karen Smith. She joined us at the first webinar, and she can answer any nutrition questions you have or things like that. We're really happy to have Amy Hamlin back, the Executive Director of the Coalition for Healthy School Food. Of course, that's the nonprofit that introduces plant-based foods and nutrition education to benefit the whole school community. And we are very excited to have Robert Groff, the principal of PS 244, the Active Learning Elementary School, join us. So PS 244 is the first public school to go all vegetarian, and it's based in New York City. And I know Robert worked closely with Amy on that, so it's exciting to have him here. Tails has had among the highest test scores in New York City, an attendance rate that has surpassed that of the city, and has been named one of the healthiest schools in the nation by the Alliance for a Healthier Generation. So he is going to tell his story and then answer some questions you may have for him. So thank you again for joining us, and I would love just to have I see that, Bob, you're on the line, so I'd love if you'd like to jump in and tell your story.
Sure. The story of the school is also very closely connected to Amy Hamlin and the Coalition for Healthy School Foods. And we started the school, this is our now 9th year, with the idea that teaching students how to understand and develop a keen idea on what it means to live a healthy lifestyle will then factor back into academic success. So we really started with a heavy emphasis on the education background and growing the understanding before we ever started talking about changing the food that we serve in school. But that first kind of initial spark came from a group of kids that we were working with that looked at the nutrition facts on chocolate milk and said, you know, why are we drinking this? It has so much sugar in it. And that was the moment that we then began the long journey of working even closer with Amy and changing the way that we give our students their daily breakfast and lunch. So that's kind of the short end of it. Certainly there was a lot of parent education, student education, and developing students' taste buds even that went into that process. And so now we're in our, we've been fully plant-based for about 4 years.
Great, Bob. Thank you. Karen has a question for you.
Hi, Bob. How are you?
Hi. Good.
I'm just wondering what you found most successful in reaching out to parents of students and how you engage them and what worked best.
Well, this goes back to, again, our relationship with Amy and the coalition, because it was our partnership that really helped make this happen. It was us being able to educate the parents, so we would set up workshops, not just on things like nutritional facts, but workshops on things like making your own veggie egg rolls, or a food tasting. Food tastings were really popular with families. The family dinner nights were outstanding. We started to do those right away, and families would come in and really gain an understanding of what type of food was going to be served in the cafeteria. And there was, in the first one of the fathers came to me and said, I send my child to school with lunch every day, but after having this food, I'll never send her with lunch again. There was a variety of cooking demonstrations that we talked about, that we had students and parents involved in, and it was really about that educational piece that helped us grow the opportunity for changing the food.
Thank you, Bob. That's wonderful. And Amy, would you like to add anything to that?
Yes, thank you for having me on again. It's really exciting to be here, and we're so thrilled about the work that schools are doing across the country. One of the things I want to say is that the food service directors that we've been working with are just fantastic. I feel like there's a big sea change in people understanding that the direction we're going in, it's not working, and that the kids are not well. It's not just about being overweight either. There's skinny kids who still have these same health problems as well, just because the diets are so processed. And so it's really wonderful to not only work with so many food service directors who are actually starting to implement these changes, but see so many food service directors who are interested in. And I think the education is key. So at these family dinner nights, we essentially invite any adult associated with the school. So the parents and the kids, of course. So the parents, the siblings, so it's like the child and their entire family, whoever lives in their home, whether it's the grandma, the aunt, whoever. The teachers, the custodians, the food service workers. So everybody's invited because all of these adults have interaction with the kids, and we want the whole school community on board. And we serve for everybody who attends, they get a free meal, and it's 100% plant-based. And we serve the recipes that we serve in the cafeteria during the daytime so that the families and all the teachers and everybody can get a sense of how great they are. And then we also do a lot of hands-on learning activities as well. So we have groups of people going around to 4 or 5 different tables and learning very specific things. Or sometimes we'll have like a non-dairy milk tasting or other types of tastings. And so it's a great, fun evening, but people learn so much. This education piece is so important that if you don't do the education and you just add these recipes to the menu, it might not work as well, because even though they taste delicious, pretty much the standard American diet, which the acronym is SAD, the standard American diet is like so processed that when it comes to eating real food, many people don't have the taste for that. And so we need to educate and get people excited about it. So even saying things like, we're so lucky at our school we get to have these special recipes, and then educating about the culture, where those recipes are from. We are developing PowerPoint slideshows about those cultures. You can play music from those cultures, and I think that makes it very exciting. But the most important piece is all adults on board and excited. When you have some teachers saying they won't try something, and they say that in front of students, that is definitely not going to work. It's important to have adults serving as role models.
Hi, Amy. This is Karen.
Hello.
I'm curious to know how a school works with your organization. Like, say there's a school that's part of a very large school district, and maybe the entire school district isn't on board. Do you have a relationship, or have you had relationships with schools like that in the past, where maybe just one particular school in the district wants to serve plant-based meals?
Well, not sort of. I mean, we work in partnership with New York City Schools, which is huge. So the number of schools we work in is limited. I mean, they have 1,200 cafeterias, and we're working with a much smaller number. So in that case, yes. And we're very happy to be very flexible to help any school that wants to be helped however we can. So you are definitely free to reach out to me. And can we put my phone number, email address, or anything on the webinar screen?
Yes, I'll pull that up right now.
Okay, great. And so yes, and it's great then if one school is doing this, that maybe it's a pilot for the rest of the district. See how it goes, and then we can go from there. So feel free to reach out to me.
Thank you so much, Amy.
You're welcome.
So we have Amy's email address and phone number right up on the screen, so you can contact her, and that'll be included in our follow-up email as well. So thank you for sharing that. And we did receive some questions before the webinar about a timeline on how to make changes in the school lunch. So we do have a little bit of information on that. So Karen is going to discuss that, and I'm just going to move back quickly to where we were for that. All right, here you go, Karen.
Hello. I just wanted to talk a little bit, since last time we focused a lot on setting some initial goals for looking at your menus and identifying the processed meats that you have. So now maybe you've already done that since our last webinar, and we understand that making menu changes takes time, and for many schools it can be maybe a bit of a challenge, or it might just take longer than anticipated. So I think it's important to set some goals to move towards the menus that you want with fewer or no offerings of processed meats. And the goals can really help you stay on track and see the progress, even if that progress and the menu changes don't happen maybe as quickly as you desire. But the result of your goal setting will really help you focus on keeping that larger goal in sight and breaking that large goal into some smaller steps. All right, so we kind of just wrote up a sample plan. Like, what would this look like if you want to start in 2017? Perhaps in January, you can just use that month to look through some of the great recipes that Amy's provided or that the Physicians Committee has, and choose one new recipe to replace one of the processed meat items on your menu. And you might want to consider what items the kids in your school already prefer. If they love tacos, perhaps try a black bean variety instead, so you don't necessarily have to go for something that is really foreign to the students in your school. Maybe try something that they're a little more familiar with. And after January, select a day in February to taste test the new recipe. And as Bob mentioned, get the kids and the families involved, create a lot of excitement about this event, involve the staff, and have that positive message of taste testing this really healthy new recipe, and reach out to your PTO possibly too for help with the event. So depending on the results of that taste test, you might want to add that recipe to your menu in March, or try another recipe and go from there. So just trying to break out these menu changes into smaller steps so that it keeps you moving in the right direction and is something manageable for you. And then throughout the rest of the school year, just continue with that process. Maybe try 1 or 2 more recipes before the school year is over, or look for some new products. If you've never tried tofu, or if there's a bean variety that you've never used, maybe now is the time to look into recipes that include those and give them a try and do some taste tests. And keep in mind that the goal is not just to reduce the processed meats, but to replace them with nutrient-dense options. So really focusing on these whole foods like Amy mentioned. So trying to incorporate the beans and other legumes to replace those processed meats, to add in fiber and other nutrients like iron and calcium that are really beneficial for the students you're serving.
All right. Thank you, Karen. All right, and I know that Amy wanted to mention some other alternatives that you could use in the lunch line, and we even have one of your recipes up here if you'd like to talk about it, Amy.
Okay, great. Well, it's really interesting because right before this webinar today, I was at a school in an after-school cooking class, and we were making Mrs. Patel's Rajma, which is an Indian kidney bean curry. Rajma just means kidney beans in India. It is a delicious recipe, super easy to make, and very inexpensive to make, actually. You can use your USDA foods to get the beans and the rice and some of the vegetables. So maybe you'll have to get the spices, or maybe you already have the spices. There's also a rice recipe that uses the same spices and then some mixed vegetables. So it's a very simple recipe. Might look like a lot of ingredients, but that's just because it's 3 different types of spices. But and we do have the flyer. You can see the picture of the flyer, and there's also a serving line sign, which is 15 inches across by 3 inches tall. And that, if you have the recipes that we offer on your serving line, then we can send you the flyers and the serving line signs, which are great because then it sort of stands out with this really nice sign. But so we have these recipes and you can download them and look at them. I also wanted to talk about direct replacements for sausage. I know sausage is a really common processed food that is used in schools, especially at breakfast, but also at lunch too. And I'm going to say the name of a company here. I hope that's okay. Because what I like about this particular company is that they are less processed. So the name is Tofurkey, and that's spelled Tofurky. And their website is tofurkey.com. And if you go to tofurkey.com, click on what we make, and then they show these different sausages. Now, obviously, you're not going to serve the beer brat flavor, but the Italian sausage, it's my favorite. I think it's really great, and it can be used in so many different ways. Like, you might not serve that one at breakfast, but at lunchtime, if you have spaghetti and a plant-based tomato sauce, you can actually saute these and just chop them up into pieces and know how many pieces it takes to get your requirement for the meat alternate. And of course, you have to tell students what it is, or at least on your menu it has to say what it actually is. But I promise you that if you have this mixed in with your spaghetti sauce, nobody's going to know the difference. They're absolutely delicious. They've won all kinds of prizes at the fancy food shows. And those food shows are not just for plant-based foods. They're for any foods. And so they've won a lot of prizes. The sodium value, I know right now the lunch target for K through 5 is 935 for the next school year. And these, for a whole sausage, are 620 milligrams of sodium. So they actually do meet the guidelines as long as you don't have sodium in other components of the meal. And you certainly don't need to have sodium in your vegetables, your fruits, or your grains. And there isn't in, so this actually could work for you. And I believe you can buy them, probably not through traditional distribution, but you can get them, and they're really good. They tried them in Ithaca, New York, and they liked them a lot there. You can also saute them in a little oil and serve them on bread with onions and peppers that are sauteed, sort of that traditional sausage sandwich. There's also a kielbasa flavor and a spinach pesto flavor, and I don't even know how you pronounce the other one. But so I think these are really good ones to try. And I would even recommend getting a few different flavors and doing a taste testing and letting students choose which one they like the best. So I wanted to make everyone aware of this brand, and we're actually hoping to work with them. We've begun discussions to have them develop some sausages that are even lower sodium, but the sodium in these does fit right now the requirements that are current.
Great. Thank you, Amy.
You're welcome.
And I have a question. Do you know off the top of your head what the cost would be for those products? If not, that's okay. We can always look into that.
I'm going to guess. So it is definitely a guess, but I believe that it might be in the 50 to 60 cent range. And I know since many of you only have about $1, $1.06, $1.10 for the food costs, that might be towards the upper end, maybe, of your meat alternate cost, but you're not serving them every day. So I think, I know the food service directors that I work with, they can make these work price-wise to have them. If they had them once a week, they could make it work. It's like if you serve this one day and Mrs. Patel's Rajma another day, Mrs. Patel's Rajma is so inexpensive to make. Plus, you can get the rice and the beans through the USDA foods, making it even cheaper. So serving Rajma on another day would offset the cost. They would average out to a lower cost.
Thanks, Amy. That's helpful. And then I wanted to ask Bob if you could give us one piece of advice for other schools that are looking to add new options or looking to maybe remove processed meat from their menu or from one day. What's the one piece of advice you would give to them to make that change?
Sure. I was just typing into the chat also to respond to that. I think one of the biggest things that we found was to do things slowly. Make sure that we have our community involved and interested and not make any kind of sudden changes. In order to do that, the food tastings and trying out the food with families was probably where we gained the biggest buy-in. So I would say looking for opportunities to have kids try out those foods in classrooms, have parents try out foods after school, and it could be as simple as hummus. For whatever reason, our kids went nuts over hummus the first time they had it. Kale actually went over really well the first time that a bunch of our kids had it. I was in a food tasting yesterday where they weren't so excited about the applesauce, but they loved the Greek yogurt. So it's also where you find out what might work when you get it into your cafeteria.
Great. Thank you, Bob. Appreciate that. Yeah, it sounds like what we keep hearing from everyone is you have to have buy-in from the whole community. You have to find out what works specifically in your school. So that's good to hear. And Amy, we did, you mentioned before USDA foods, and we did have a question about how to get some of the healthier options for that. And since so many schools use it, could you talk about that briefly in ways that you could bring in more plant-based options with USDA foods, or less processed foods, or just talk on that briefly?
I don't know what the breakdown of the people on the call is, how many of them are food service directors, but certainly all the food service directors know about the USDA foods. And I am looking at the list of the ingredients that are available, the foods available for the school year, the 2017 school year, and you know, they're by category, and certainly there's fruits and vegetables, there are beans, nuts and seeds, and there are grains. And there's also a lot of animal products. And my understanding is that most food service directors do use a bigger amount of their allotment for the animal products, but these plant products are available. So you can get dry beans or you can get canned beans. And most people don't know this, but canned beans are basically as healthy as the dry beans. They really don't lose much in the canning process. So although it's less expensive in general, maybe that's not the case with USDA foods, but in general it's less expensive to use dry beans. I would not let canned beans stop you. You know, use canned beans if that's easier, because they're still really healthy. And they offer black beans, garbanzo beans, otherwise known as chickpeas, Great Northern beans, pink beans, pinto beans, red kidney beans, refried beans, vegetarian beans, they're all vegetarian beans, and dry lentils. So you can do a lot with those. And they also offer, in the green category, a lot of different, some different spaghettis and rotinis and penne and brown rice. You can also get oats there. So you know, there are foods you can get. They don't have anything specifically to replace processed meats on the USDA list, but certainly ingredients that you can use to introduce plant-based options to your menu.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. I appreciate that.
Could I add something else about, I want to follow up on what Bob said about hummus?
Yes, please do.
Okay, so some schools would like to have a way to offer a plant-based entree every day, and that is really great because it's interesting that the category which people often associate with the main dish or the entree is called meat/meat alternate. And probably it'll change to protein, I'm guessing, because the school meal program follows the U.S. Dietary Guidelines, but it usually lags behind by about 5 years or something like that with updates to the U.S. Dietary Guidelines. So they changed the meat category to the protein category, which is interesting because it's a biochemical term rather than an actual food, but at least it takes the focus off of meat. And that's what we try to do because we know everybody eats too much meat and cheese. And so it's just a great option to be introducing more plant-based entrees. And so in New York City, what they have done is for all schools that have alternative menus or vegetarian menus, they have a hummus grab-and-go with pretzels available every day. So there's always a fully plant-based option every day in those schools. And other options, other things like that is veggie burgers that you can keep frozen. So if you have students coming through the line or if you know there's students who want to eat these, you can easily have frozen things that are available that can be easily taken out and heated up. And that makes it easy, especially with hummus and especially with veggie burgers, to offer a plant-based option every day. The only thing I would caution with the veggie burgers or any of the meat substitutes is to look out for egg or dairy ingredients. A lot of the meat sausage substitutes, for example, might have egg whites or other egg ingredients, and sometimes dairy ingredients. So I would look for the kinds that don't have those.
Great. Thank you so much, Amy. And I'd love to throw it back to Bob to talk a little bit more about that, and how do you choose which entrees work best at your school, and if you found one that doesn't work as well as others, what do you do?
Sure. For us, it's a big process because we're in New York City. That process is definitely not going to be the same for people outside of the city. For us, it's really the menu items have to be approved by the Office of School Food in order to come then onto our menu. So that goes with the amount of protein served and having all the USDA requirements as well as the cost. So for us, there's a lot of layers to go through for that. But what I would say is there's some trial and error involved. We went through a series of trying out tofu with a variety of sauces. Some of them worked, some of them didn't work at all. There's a number of menu items that we've tried out where it's like falafel. When falafel was introduced, it worked well, then it stopped working well because of the way it was being served. So we had to come back to the drawing board to say, all right, the intention is for it to be in a wrap with pickles and this sauce in it, so then it stays moist and the kids will tend to go to it more. So there's a lot of just trial and error, seeing what they liked, seeing what they didn't like, before we could settle on what made the most sense. The kids were involved in that in classrooms as well, and in the cafeteria. We became the test kitchen for New York City's vegetarian or plant-based meal items, so that was a big deal too before the actual menu went into place.
Great. Thank you so much. That's very interesting. And I'd like to also, we just saw recently a call to the USDA for a warning label on processed meat, which goes back to our first webinar on why the science behind the dangers of processed meat. And I was just hoping that, Karen, you could talk a little bit more about the call for that warning label and what that means.
There's a 9-page petition filed by the Center for Science in the Public Interest asking that the USDA include a warning label specific for colon cancer risk on processed meat items, including meat and poultry. So let me see here. It's requiring that all meat and poultry products that are preserved by smoking, curing, salting, and or the addition of chemical preservatives bear the warning label. And so with this possibly coming in the future, it's a really good time for schools to start considering moving these foods off their menus, because you can just imagine what will happen as a result of these warning labels being placed on food.
Great. Thank you, Karen. So I think we've gotten through almost all of the questions we've gotten so far today. So I'd love to just bring up our speakers one more time if they have any other last points they'd like to bring up. Amy or Bob, is there any last thing you'd like to say?
I think there's a lot of, I said this a couple of times, but it's about trial and error and being willing to take a risk and sometimes not be successful and go back and try it again. And in addition to that, really reaching out to the community to gain their support and interest. So I'm happy to, I'll put my email address in the chat right now. I'm happy to field any questions if people think of them afterwards.
And I guess I would add that involving students in taste testing and naming the recipes, I know this is not from us, but from another organization. The kids named the bean burritos Big Bad Burritos, and they thought that was really funny, and it was a popular name. We also had a veggie burger, a homemade black bean, sweet potato, and oat burger, which is a huge hit. And it's in our recipes, so you can get it in our recipe booklet that you can download under the files box. That recipe was originally called Beanie Burgers, and actually in the recipe file it's still called Beanie Burgers, I believe. But a 5th grade student said to me, you really should name that something different. And I said, what should we name it? And he said, Awesome Bean Burgers. And so we renamed it to Awesome Bean Burgers. And so getting the buy-in from the students by having them taste it, I think one thing isn't just like, taste this, we're going to start serving it. That's not good. Give them 2 choices. So, for example, if you get the Tofurkey sausages, get 2 or 3 different flavors. Let them try them. Try them in a sauce on spaghetti. Try them as a sandwich. Try them different ways. And ask them, like, which flavor do they like better? Which way do they like it prepared better? What could it be called? And that's how you really get the buy-in, is show them that their opinion matters. And during taste testing, it's very important to tell students about taste testing rules. And probably any food service director is well aware of this. I'm not sure if there's other people on the call who aren't food service directors, but don't yuck my yum. So that's a rule. If you like it, you can say you like it. If you don't like it, don't say anything. Don't make a face, because it is amazing how students influence each other, and I'm sure you all know that by being in the schools.
Thank you so much, Amy and Bob. I appreciate that insight. I think that's what we come up with again and again, and so it's nice to hear that you all are seeing that in other schools as well. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us and for your questions. If you have any more questions, feel free. You can always contact me. My email address is up there. Bob has his up as well, and you've seen Amy's. And we'll send up a follow-up email as well, so you can get those again. We appreciate your time today, and have a lovely day. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.